So we across consulting and industry, so we can bring in multiple onto industry, CPG and retail, which kind of was a pioneer in the usage of analytics. Vijaya, I and Kishore go back a while, and we were part of one of the first analytics companies out of India, and most of our clients were CPG. Over time, I guess they have been sort of overtaken by technology firms. As if you look to the pioneers of AI today, the technology firms will probably be the ones you would name. And I'm sure we'll get insights from the great panel that we've assembled here into how CPG and the retail industry is kind of trying to apply modern techniques of AI profitability or improve sales and top line and bottom. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves. Over to you guys. Go first. We'll do a lot.
Perfect. Thank you, Dipayan. Hi, everybody. This is Bhaskar Roy here, working as a client partner, leading retail and other verticals for Fractal Analytics. Been in the industry for about 16 odd years, doing different kinds of roles. Really excited to be part of the roundtable today and look forward to a great discussion.
Bhaskar, it'll be great if you could spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the really cool problems that you guys are tackling in the CPG space.
Absolutely. See, within CPG and retail, as we look at the continuum of projects that we are working with, these span the traditional areas of revenue management onto supply chain, onto different operational aspects, as well as you start looking at it from a retailer's lens. How do we think about, for example, customer centricity as a key metric or key way of transforming your data and transforming your business accordingly to then drive the top line for the organization? There is a huge number of projects that are done there. The traditional ones, for example, are contact center analytics and other operational aspects. The newer ones focus more on voice, text, and image-based analytics to be able to better understand, for example, what's on the shelf, how are the out of stocks happening, and can we create automated and intelligent processes around these to be able to drive decisioning across the enterprise.
Thanks, Bhaskar. Hope to get more details as we go along in the session. I'd like to invite Dan, if you could do a quick intro as well.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Nanesh Bode or Dan. So I lead the co-creation labs at WNS, and I've been in the field of design thinking for around a decade, from working across a whole spectrum of problems, from helping underwear companies design better packaging to working with municipal corporations to drive sustainability behaviors around water consumption, to conducting design thinking workshops with leaders and data scientists at the World Trade Center in New York. So that's an entire spectrum of what I do. In terms of the kind of problems that we're trying to solve at the WNS Co-Creation Labs, the primary purpose is to bring in digital interventions in the way business processes are run, to bring in, of course, operational efficiencies, but primarily to create human-centric processes which are focused to people who are working within the organization, and of course, delivering better experience to customers. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. Remind us to ask you how you managed to convince the municipal corporation to save water. I don't think we've ever managed to do that. But remind us to touch on that topic while we go along.
I never said I solved that problem.
Kishore, if you mind introducing yourself.
Happy to, Dipayan. Hey, folks. Happy Friday. Kishore. I work with AB InBev. So make and sell beer. Brands are more popularly known than the company name itself. As Dipayan rightly touched, I remember starting off my career very early days. This was 2005, 2006. The CPG was really using some cool analytics and data. They started to play out, but the tech companies have really, gone much ahead. Some of the other industries as I'll try to keep this short. I'm sure I'll get chance again to speak. So here at AB InBev, I'm the analytics leader for manufacturing and logistics areas. And our focus more is on the implementation side of things, right? How do we actually get the results rather than just solutions, looking at it from the perspective of managing talent itself, the end user, are they adopting in their decision making, how they are looking at it. So broadly, 3 areas I would put in. One is on the marketing and sales side, where a lot of AI related technologies and solutions and use cases that we are working on. The second is on the supply chain, which is your entire manufacturing part of it, logistics, warehouse, inventory things, 3PL, 4PL, these are third-party logistics, fourth-party logistics, so on and so forth. That's interesting. And third is rest all, which is support and strategy side as well. So those are the 3 broad areas where we are trying to use more of I would say intelligence in helping us make better decisions, give a consistent quality experience from our products for consumers. So no matter where you buy a Budweiser, whether it's in Bangalore or in China or in New York, it should taste the same for you. So we're having some programs around that. That's an interesting one that we're doing. Last but not the least, again, thanks 3i for this. Deepa and it's like all old friends at the same table. More or less with all of you, I've personally worked and I've known. I'm looking forward to the next some time to have a great discussion.
Thanks, Kishore. Yeah, nice. It seems that the only place we meet these days is on round tables. But the way that AB InBev ensures the taste is in uniform, does it involve you guys tasting the beer imported from the different countries?
No. That's a highly skilled and very, very highly paid skill set. If you're able to, the tasters who are there, who can taste and say, I mean, as we might think that it is not so easy, right? If you're a taster, then you're restricted from eating a lot of other foods. Because you want to ensure that your taste palette is being true to make the judgment calls that you're supposed to make. So believe me, while it tastes well, it sounds good, but that's one job I definitely do not want to do.
Yeah, sounds like a trade-off I'm willing to make. So let me know if there's an opening.
Sure.
Vijaya, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, so as Kishore was saying, hearing you, Kishore the Pine, I mean, it just feels like Marketing Days all over again. So it's just the same lunch conversations that we used to have. So I've been in the analytics industry same time as you guys started in 2005. I actually started my career as a marketing manager, and then I crossed over to analytics consulting roles. And I've had the fortune to work actually with both the analytics focused companies as well as large technology companies. So therefore, I have seen both sides of the evolution of how it evolved from boutique firms in India to now being something that is being delivered by all the large consulting firms and the technology firms, so to speak. And today I work with Bridge I2I, and I lead their consumer business, primarily working with CPG, retail, pharma, and telecom clients. And what I have seen is, I mean, as Bhaskar was rightly saying, I mean, there is a mix of both traditional as well as, the cutting edge analytics, where we are using both structured and unstructured data, using image and etc. But what really I have seen it evolve into is from being a strategic, from something, some data analytics being used for strategic decisions, to now empowering the frontline staff to make data-driven decisions. I think that, to me, has been the biggest change that has happened. And today, most of our analytics that we do is focused on last mile adoption.
Thanks, Vijay. So I'll just introduce myself very briefly. I work for Myntra. I've been working for the Flipkart group for almost 6 years now. Currently, I work for Myntra, heading their analytics team. And previously, I have had some experience with banking, CPG, retail, various industries using analytics to drive decisions. So yeah, really look forward to, I think there's going to be a really, really engaging discussion looking at experience that we have over here. And Vijay, I'd like to just, pick off where you left off with the first topic. A couple of things. One, you have been in this industry for a while now, and you've seen this industry from both angles, as you said, right? You've been a consumer of analytics and AI, and you now are a practitioner for a while of analytics and AI.
Yes.
Over time, you alluded to one way in which you've seen the decisions at probably at a 500 feet level now getting impacted by, I think, 30,000 foot level decisions made. Over and above that, do you think the kind of questions, obviously, how have you seen the kind of questions evolve? Have they been matured? Have they become much more nuanced? Are the conversations you're having with folks in the industry changing, etc.? Would love to hear a kind of a time series view, if you will, of how this thing is evolving.
Absolutely. I think there is a big understanding today. I started off in marketing, so to speak. As a practitioner, when I was working in the marketing role as a marketing manager, I think those days the consumption
has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line.
Analytics per se. At best, we would do something on Excel or, look at something from the SAP and then do some, and then, that's where it ended. But today, I think most, the practitioners in the companies, in the CPG and the retail companies are very aware of the power of analytics and how it can actually be a competitive advantage. We see the large companies actually investing a whole lot in data and analytics, while the newer age, the companies which are still, at the fence, so to speak, also move towards that. So there is a lot of interest now. So the fundamentals, if you see from a CPG or a retail perspective on what questions you need answered, that remains the same. It's always the what, when, how, where, why of the consumer that you want to understand, which actually determines your marketing, your supply chain, and your financial initiatives that you would want to take. But what has changed is a lot of interest or openness to use data for this. There was a time when there is a lot of reliance on experience, or what you have done on the field, which actually came to bear for your decisions today. But today there is a lot of interest to see what is data also seeing. Is there somewhere I can leverage? Today, those days I remember us depending only on survey data or syndicated data to do our analysis. Today, there is a whole plethora of data that you use, whether it is social, search. There is a lot of real-time feedback that you are able to get, and you're able to see the decisions that you are making and get a real-time view of what the consumer is seeing. So the feedback mechanism that we have today has also improved tremendously. And as you rightly said, it is technology which is driving all these changes. And hence the need also in terms of the questions to know more real time and more the here and now kind of thing. If I do something, if I run a campaign, what are my early reads? I want to see that immediately. Whereas, there was a time when you were ready to, you launched the campaign, you finished it, and then you said, okay, let me do a focus group discussion, just see what is happening. That is all you did. But today you want real-time consumers in different parts of the regions and in different geographies actually giving you that feedback at the same time. So therefore, that is how I see the evolution really happening in terms of it becoming more real-time, more data-driven, and the usage of plethora of data, so to speak, structured, unstructured, image, etc.
So thanks for that, Vijay. Really insightful there. Kishore, just want to follow up with you there. With a sort of a little bit of an addition, back in the days, the data literacy, so to speak, of our customers, right, and the customers or stakeholders that we work, used to be fairly limited, in the sense that, if you recall, we would be told to dump down or make it simple, right? The presentation of our output would have to be in business language, right? Do you see with the greater penetration of analytics into, I mean, there are many more analytics courses. Analytics is a part of MBA courses now. People are going for MDPs. Greater understanding of just the core principles and the core mathematics and statistics behind analytics within a bigger appreciation, and hence do you see a more richer conversation possible between the analyst and the stakeholder? Over time, do you see that changing?
Yeah, I mean, I would partly agree to the second part of the statement that you made, which is, the conversations are getting richer, but are people really appreciating the maths and the intelligence behind it? I don't think so. There are a lot of self-serve solutions, accelerators that are getting built up, right? I remember early programmers who used to program in C. They were much more sound, much more logical, and they could really code anything, right? Of late, if you see, everything is just drag and drop, and even in analytics and everything, it's so. Of course, there is a requirement of that talent for any player in the industry, right? We do need to, but are those people equally participative in? One them to do is build that intelligence, make that enable help and right. So I want to see certain cuts of data, make it easy for me, right? No matter where it is coming from. I think Vijay pointed out a great point where, the data is really exploded in terms of, various different ways, not just the syndicated or the survey data that, right? The technology that is needed to mine the data is also in place, right? One challenge that I see typically is, again, I'll take a very, very, I would say long shot example, right? These days, AI is more like the Signal, right? I mean, we all have been used to WhatsApp. Suddenly there is something that comes up, oh, Signal is good, the security is awesome. So there are N number of people who are downloading the Signal app, but the actual number of users are not many. They are still stuck. AI, ML, it's the new animal in the zoo, right? Everyone wants to do an AI project and everyone wants to. But are the organizations there effectively today to really use it into the decision-making process? I don't think so. Definitely not in the CPG. CPG is I would say, in the nascent stages of AI. That doesn't mean that there are no cases at all, no use cases at all. There are quite a few. AI projects are there, but is there an AI way of thinking, AI way of running business? I think CPG players still have some time to go ahead. But the point that you made about better appreciation of data literacy, definitely yes. You'll be surprised to know that even our global CEO Carlos Brito, he himself went through peak, which was taught by all the professors of MIT. There is an upside coming right from the top where this needs to be made. But the ground still needs to be made ready, right? In terms of, let's say, your digital and data platforms, your customer, for your marketing side of analytics or the intelligent solutions, you need your CDP up and running and everything is there. Companies are still putting it in place. It's not there completely yet. In some markets, okay, you might have been already there. For example, if I talk of our manufacturing, we have some breweries which have the sensors helpers already tell us a particular line is going to go down, or when should the preventive maintenance technician visit could happen. But there are some breweries which are still like, people are checking it, manually checking is happening, right? So it's huge spectrum that is there. There's a whole amount of change that is happening. There is now seat at the table at a CXO level meetings for a analytics leader or AI leader in the company. There are N number of courses, the MOOC courses. Even if you look at any of the hackathons and all the competitions that happen, we see a whole lot of them. They are spanning across all the areas, but within the CPG space, I think we are still in the nascent stage in terms of AI becoming the way of life. We are still in the AI projects, so to say, phase. I'm sure different players are at different levels. Companies which are born in the technology, yeah, they are advanced. For example, an Amazon or a Netflix, if you talk about, everything they do is the program that is running an Uber or something of that sort. But for a typical manufacturer who's actually making a shampoo or a beer for that matter and trying to get it to the market, to the consumer, to give them to the same experience, get their feedback and all, it's still not there in terms of, you know, AI being the way of things. There's certainly a desire to go that way. The investments are starting to happen. There is an education drive that are happening within the companies. The new talent is coming into place, but it will take some time, I think, to get to that point.
मुझे अभी तक इसमें से एक सेशन का भी याद नहीं है.
For those who are not speaking, can they be on mute, please? Thank you.
I suppose that wasn't a comment on what I said.
So, quick follow-up there, right? So, do you think what's holding it up is the IT investments and the capex required to make the IT investments? Because appreciation is there, the top management intent to invest is there, but from what I understood from what you're saying, right, a lot of the data might not be getting collected at all data collection points. So, is that because of not capex being, instead of everything being front-loaded, capex being done over a period of time?
I think it's not right. It's just that. See, Deepa, at the end of the day, for us to get our salaries paid, we need to sell the beer in the market, right? So the investments that are needed, the product in the market, is true for any manufacturer, right? People need to start using their products or start using their services for a certain revenue to get generated. So these functions will get primarily focused. Right. Now, does it mean that the technology which was existing all redundant? We cannot just change. We are talking jobs. We are talking people, right? And again, sorry about the word, but COVID has really changed how we consume life. I mean, right? I mean, how we live our lives. Right. Earlier, I used to get scared if I'm in a meeting and my son used to run into the meeting. Now I'm like, okay, everyone says, oh, hi. And people still continue the meeting, right? So the way of life itself is changing. And for us as a marketer, as a producer, as someone who's trying to understand how this behavior of consumer is changing his or her decision-making process, right? And how will his preferences change with that? Now, for me to be ready with the technology to be in place to beat that, one is the understanding of it, and getting the ground ready itself is going to take time, right? The data that comes from consumer data platform, consumer data platform, right? For us to build that, it's a pretty huge exercise, and it cannot happen like very quickly. You need to keep in mind the changing way of how consumer is connecting and consuming the media and with the brands. You need to keep in mind what technologies that is changing. It's not like a single cloud solution that's there and everyone is going to use it. Even that is changing a lot. So should we keep the data with us? Should we give it to someone else? In logistics, for example, I remember when I started, it was all 3PL, 4PL. This is third-party logistics, fourth-party logistics. Now we are talking about 5PL, which is fifth-party logistics, right? Where you're talking entirely about completely automated, like a remote you have in your hand and being the main stakeholder and trying to run the whole show for the logistics itself. Now, to make those changes actually in the ground, especially for a country like India, the carriers are there, right? We cannot park all the trucks which are 10, 15 years old just like that. Carriers won't do that. Even though it has an imprint on the environment as well, autonomous vehicles won't just come in like that. It is going to take time, and it needs push and preparation from all different angles. There is the education piece, there is the consumer appreciation piece to it. There is readiness from the providers that needs to go into it. It's a bit of a slow process, right? But that being said, another interesting point, I'm sorry if I'm taking a little bit more time here, is, see, it'll have a cascading effect, right? It takes that initial, dhakka marna. It's in that stage. But once it reaches a certain threshold, it'll leapfrog or it'll move super fast. After that, the adoption becomes easy. I think the CPG sector as such is still in that initial getting to that threshold level before AI becomes the way of working or the way of life within the industry and the sector.
Thanks. It was quite elaborate and helpful. Dan, wanted to kind of tee off from there. You mentioned something very unique of using design thinking principles to co-create solutions, right? Can you give us a couple real life examples and typically kind of touch on solutions to the problems that Kishore had laid out? ML within the CPG firm.
All right. So a lot of design thinking is built around great storytelling. So I'm going to dip into a very short story, right? And this talks about bringing empathy and AI together to deliver benefits to businesses. So there's this very great case study about an organization called Wegmans, based out of US. It's a large retail chain. What was happening is this was around the time when they were expanding fairly rapidly and they were adding a lot of new stores and a lot of full-time employees. And the cost of employee benefits, started to rise fairly rapidly. Now, what typically a business would do is they would pick up the most expensive benefit or the least used benefit and simply chip that away. But employee benefits is a very touchy topic, right? The moment you talk about reducing employee benefits, nobody's going to be happy. There's always going to be impact on productivity, attrition, and things like that. And again, those are very scary words. What they did is they did something called a conjoint analysis. Now, that's typically used to identify which features of your products are the most valuable to your customers. So you can actually pick up a product which is worth $100 and say, $20 for this feature, $30 for this feature, $5 for this feature. And they said, we'll do a conjoint analysis of our benefits program. And they were able to identify the most valuable aspect of their benefit and the least valuable. So instead of just going by measures like least used or the most expensive or the least expensive, they simply cut away the least valuable ones. The result was that the impact on employee, morale or productivity or attrition was very less. At the same time, the organization was able to save a lot of money. So this is typically how your design thinking, which is human-centric approach, comes together with any analytics-led intervention. So analytics will give you scale, design thinking will kind of give you direction, and that's how the two of these are supposed to be managed. A lot of this will also help because every solution that anybody's trying to build has already been built at some point in time. What happens is most solutions don't get adopted, right? And that's where really design thinking comes in. If you're able to bring in the right kind of design, you have great adoption, and the solution, is then you don't have problems with scalability and adoption, and then you're going into further sprints and doing new releases and things like that. So that's kind of how design thinking marries into any analytics or digital solutions that you're trying to do.
Dan, thanks. That's, I'd never thought of doing a conjoint analysis to what's so now, if I take a step back, right, most of us domain. How are you? So, for example, this would be not even 25% the analysts that how are you seeing this? Are you working with anybody to make this a much more part of just the core DNA of how analysts think about corporate, WNS? And I would love to hear something of how are you sort of scaling this rather than making it limited to, let's say, a small group of evangelists.
So within WNS as well, we have a full RNA practice, right? A research and analytics practice, and even within the digital transformation team, we have a data-driven transformation team. And in fact, today you can't design any digital intervention unless data is part of it. Right? All your digital interventions, the bedrock of all of them is data. So similarly to what I said earlier, right? How we work is the overall direction and the strategy is defined through design thinking. The whole enabling factor within that is your data. Right now, around this, you build different frameworks, different models of engagement, and you deploy them in whatever engagements you're having with clients, whether it's, in our co-creation labs or outside. Yeah, that I think should answer the question.
Bhaskar, would love to hear your point of view on this. Have you you work with multiple clients across your entire experience. Have you seen clients adopt this sort of thinking and approach to solve problems?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, on the lines of what Dan was talking about earlier as well, there are different elements of design thinking that come into play as you're looking at different solution areas or business outcomes that you're looking to drive. The first and the most important part is whenever product development is taking place. That is where design thinking workshops with the end stakeholders, end users is critical to be able to understand how they're going to interact with that end product. Build those into the whole solution framework itself as you start the development process, and ensuring as you're doing all of this to actually follow the whole agile principles, so that there is iterative feedback coming in from these end stakeholders at different stages, to be able to then contribute to be able to create that product in a very contributory manner. That's one line of work, I would say. The other is when you're working on more of a process. In that case, I would call it more of a design-led solution development, where you actually immerse yourself and work closely with the end stakeholders to look at their process, understand, map it out. For example, a couple of years ago, we were working with a large retailer, and they were looking at automating one of the processes in their contact center. So the first step that the team working with me took was we did a two-day immersive workshop where we actually sat with the agents that are taking calls, responding to chats, responding to emails, and in that two-day process, essentially understood the different steps that go in at all these stages in the process, from when a call comes in, how it gets routed, who gets to receive that call finally, how does it need to then be rerouted depending on what the customer is telling us, how do they get quicker at understanding all of these things, right? So that was the first step, the two-day immersive workshop. A very happy byproduct of this whole process was there were 2 to 3 new use cases that came up as we did these workshops, which the client had never even thought about. And combined with the original solution of the automation of the process that we were looking at, it actually gave them a much more comprehensive set of use cases to actually then get funding for, and actually quantify the benefit on the bottom line right upfront, which they were not able to do without that immersion. So very nice way of actually doing a design-led solution development that played a huge part in eventual adoption of the solution as well.
Bhaskar, see, just a quick follow-up question there, right? One of the issues that I have often faced is a lack of patience with regards to when can start generating some concrete results. One of the drawbacks I would see to this sort of approach, and if my thinking is wrong, is that you're probably extending the part. I mean, typically when you do an analytics project, there's a huge silent phase, right? When you're dealing with data problem, no output is coming out, and the client is kind of coming back and forth. I've paid you guys a lot of money. What are you doing? This would extend that part of the proportion when your no tangible output is coming out. Duration of the project is probably going to increase. Do you see that as a hurdle?
Not so much, because and that's where I spoke also about the whole agile ways of development that is now coming into agile ways of developing, which is coming into analytics and AI now, right? So essentially running the whole project in sprints, where at the end of every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on how you are kind of structuring your sprint, you have some sort of an output that you're working closely with the end stakeholders or the product owner as well, depending on what route you're going, to actually then get that feedback, iterate over it over the next sprint, and then come back with a solution that is gradually improving over time, so that the end stakeholder also sees the development, understands that their input is being taken into the development process, and the end outcome finally, whether it's a product or a solution, actually has higher acceptability and adoption because that end stakeholder feedback has been taken at different stages. For example, a very recent one that we've done, the actual analytics development, so to say, was about a year long, but we ran that as 3-week sprint. So every 3 weeks, the end stakeholders saw an output, which then iteratively improved over time. And then in a phased manner, every 2 months, we actually did proper releases that they could start using in their day-to-day, rather than that whole silent phase that you were referring to, Dipayan.
That's a great point of agile methodology, right? That's advantages. So follow up to that, Kishore, just kind of switching gears a little bit here, right? Most of us, when we think of CPG, think of the customer and the marketing angle of, right? Typically, even when we started off with doing CPG analytics, most of our work was around customer, marketing, mind metrics, so on and so forth. However, I do think that logistics is a lifeblood. I mean, your margins are determined at efficiency. It is probably in the larger universe not as well understood as marketing analytics or customer analytics is. So if you could just talk use cases where analytics, OR, ML, AI, etc. is used to make logistics more efficient, I think that will be very educative for the rest of us.
Sure, Dipen. Great question. See, one of the use cases that we try and do is we have, when our products go into the market, this specific to Ibn Bev I'm talking about. So we have bottles, we have kegs, right? Cans usually are sent for recycling. Bottles, we try and get them back and go through a cleaning process, and they can be used again, right? And this has a huge impact on the environment as well, right? If you were to make a bottle, you're going to spoil the environment a little bit more than to use a bottle which is already. That's why. Even financially, it costs more to purchase a bottle rather than use a bottle which is there. So the use case here that we've used is to map out the entire journey of the bottle once it departs our breweries, all the way till it comes back. Now this is a good global project that we are doing. It was a lot more easier for us to do the traceability of the bottle in European countries because the return cycle is much more disciplined. There are set ways. In developing countries and especially in India, it's very difficult for us to get it back, right? So one of the innovative things that we're trying to do is if we can have a technology that would help us trace the bottle through the entire journey. If you can put something already on the bottle, which this is not yet fully realized in India. It's still, the project is still like in the indices. That's one. The second thing is we are trying, again, not really AI into play here, but one of the solutions that we thought is the solutions. This also plays into the points that Bhaskar and Dan were making in terms of design thinking. Design thinking is not just about the project, but could be about the overall solution as well, right? One. And second is you could potentially tap into external environment as well. Right. So one of the ideas that which we'll be soon testing out in India and few of the markets is, for example, we have a lot of food delivery apps where people are going to the customers' houses already, right? When they are delivering the food. Now, can we tie up with them to get them the bottles that people have in their homes, right? So now that is something which is not really there within our cycle of players. It's an external player, service provider, a food service provider is there, last mile connectivity. They've mastered the technology. Those guys are already there. And all we need to do is if we can partner with them to make sure that once people are consuming our products, the bottles are not even here and there, but can we, can they park it or just give it to the guy who's there who can collect it and get it back to us, right? So that's another interesting way where we are trying to see. that another area where we are leveraging AI is or on this is when we make the quality about one of the most important things for us is the quality of the beer, right? No matter in which brewery you produce, we need to make taste is very, very consistent, right? So if we can have an algorithm which is understanding various parameters of all the raw materials that go into making of a beer. For example, the barley, quality of the barley, right? The fermentation duration that is there, the size of the tank, the amount of humidity that is there, age of the barley that goes into it. Right, if we can factor in and with certain probability, if you can say that, yeah, the quality is going to be, this much. Typically, how it happens is when it's in the big, huge fermentation tank, when it's just about beer, there's a side outlet which comes where we take it out and it goes to a quality testing lab there within the brewery, which determines saying that, yeah, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, so the process goes. So the idea technology to automate all of this, right? Instead of testing the quality after the fermentation happens, can I move it front? Depending on the raw materials that I'm using, the quality of it, can I develop an algorithm which will say that with this amount of things that if you are giving it for your beer production, then this is the quality that you can expect. So that we can change any changes that would happen within the process in the steps after. For this, there's a huge project that we do is called as a digital twin, which essentially is a digital brewery will be there, right? It's one of those bond or the happens virtually where you can see and see if you can increase the temperature somewhere, you can decrease the humidity somewhere, how it's going to change its impact. It's aspirational as of now. We are in the very, very early stages of these. The process to develop these is, again, it takes a lot of sensors in the existing process for us to collect the data to understand what's happening and what is going on inside of it. But the idea is to get there. So these are some of the use cases within the, I would say, logistics and manufacturing space that
very, very interesting, Kishore. And, I think that is one of the areas in which even I have seen in e-commerce where almost 40% of the investment, so to speak, in terms of analyst bandwidth, etc., is solving supply chain across logistics, warehousing, etc. So that kind of is recognized as one of the key areas. As a follow-up, Dan wanted to reach out, ask you a question, right? Now, see between sort of front-end customer-facing questions that would be asked of a logistics manager is one is hard, which is the logistic part, and very bounded, reduce the last mile delivery cost, right? It's that bounded. Whereas, and if the project goes through, the cost benefit is very easy for let's say a CFO to visualize that if my cost per shipment goes down by 20 cents across markets, I'll save 200 million. Whereas when you look at a typical customer problem, it in a much more nebulous manner, describe the drivers of demand, etc., kind of thing, right? And even then, how do I take an answer to a problem which itself is a slightly nebulous question to its logical conclusion of making or saving money might not be as clear, right? So in your experience, have you seen that it's easier to convince a client to invest into like analytics into a back-end, so to speak, problem rather than a front-end problem? And what are some of the techniques that you would have used to convince stakeholders or clients to invest into a particular problem? That the question is a slightly open-ended question, right? It's not a very direct open-ended question.
So, for analytics, it's a little easier because a lot of times you can have, demonstrable case studies and plug-and-play solutions and things like that, right? It's a lot of times it's from point A to point B. You can draw that linear graph fairly easily. When it comes to design plus analytics, it becomes a little complicated, and it's a function of not every leader is the same, not every organization is the same. So the whole acceptance of design plus analytics is the first really battle that you have to fight, right? So why do you need to bring analytics, why do you have to bring design into the way we are doing analytics? My analytics is working fine. What is design going to do for it? Like, how is it going to add value? So you will have leaders who are thinking strategically, who are thinking long term. And if you go and talk to these leaders, the primary problems that they're thinking about is, and this is when I'm getting into the secret sauce area. And I've actually asked this question to a lot of leaders, right? What is it that keeps you up in mind, like up at night? So there are two things, right? One is the fear of unknown, right? That there's something happening in the background and I'm not aware that this is happening and suddenly it's going to hit me. And the second thing that they always are thinking of, how can I deliver better experience to all the stakeholders who are working with me, right? And when I talk about experience, it's your clients, it's your employees, it's your end customers, your partners, everyone. Now, the first bit is I would say a lot easier for us to solve through pure play analytics and data led interventions. The second part is where design really comes into play, because when you talk about experience, it's not really quantitative. It's a very qualitative, very the word you used was nebulous, right? It's a very nebulous area, and it's something that a lot of organizations, lot of leaders are constantly trying to solve. So my secret sauce of selling, or my secret sauce of embedding design into any problem that we're trying to solve, is not just that it's strategically going to deliver better customer experience or better employee experience or partner experience. The experience of solving the problem itself is going to be a lot better, because, and that's very important for us, especially coming from the fact that I come from WNS Co-Creation Labs, and the fact that we are trying to do is not just that we're trying to solve complex problems, but we are making the whole process of solving problems a lot more interactive, a lot more engaging and better. And that's another role that a design thinker needs to play, right? Which is why I said stories are such an important aspect of what we do. So the quantitative comes from analytics and the stories come from design. And our job is to basically marry those two together to solve strategic problems for these leaders. And that's also how we sell it. Because when I talk to my client partners or my sales teams, yes, one aspect is they want to make their commissions because they want to hire sales. The other aspect is that they want to give their clients a better experience of working with them. They want those clients to give great testimonials, which they can share with everyone. They want their clients to, talk about how WNS provides a great experience of solving problem, because also in terms of where you are in terms of that value chain of problem solving, you're able to move up. It's not just about effectiveness, it's also about the experience that you've been able to provide while solving that particular problem.
It's a great answer. There's a great answer, Dan. And as you were talking, one of the problems which plagues us is that of returns. Because we look at returns very quantitatively in the sense that if returns comes in, it's a cost to us, etc. Whereas it's full, if I may, in better word, experience for the customer. So maybe we need to put on a design hat over there to try and design a process which is as frictionless for the customer, protects the customer from a bad experience, and kind of protects our bottom line as well. So maybe I'll reach out to you separately. My next question, Bhaskar, want to really leverage your experience of consulting of all these years. So when we started off 20 years back, we wanted to convince companies that analytics is important, AI, ML is all important. And they've got convinced to the extent that they now consider it a core function, and the CAO positions have been created, so on and so forth, right? Are you seeing any impact on that of companies' willingness to engage with external consultancies on creating analytic solutions, or do they see this as IP which they really want to keep in house? And if that is so, what is the kind of strategies that you guys have been using to work with that mindset that this is something which is core to me, this is IP, this is one of my key success factors, and I want to really protect it and not let external influence so much?
Absolutely. That's a very interesting question that you asked there, Dipayan. That is indeed a question that crosses the minds of CXOs as they're thinking about either building out new capabilities, going after new initiatives, or setting up new centers for in-house analytics across the globe. As we think of this, right, what we need to understand first is it's not a binary decision that they are looking to make, because they inherently realize that it's a continuum, and the balance between in-house vis-a-vis consulting firms doing AI needs to change depending on the specific problem or the initiative that that the company is trying to go after. And what determines that that proportion change essentially is things like the availability of time to value. Do I have 3 months to deliver on something, or do I have maybe a slightly longer runway to actually think through and then have my in-house team work on it? What are the outcomes that I'm looking to drive? Are they strategic and critical for my top line growth, or they are more longer term benefits that I'm looking to drive for my bottom line? And then most importantly, the sponsorship for these initiatives, where is that coming from? And how closely they want to kind of be involved with this to be able to deliver the impact. Now, as we look at all of these key considerations, right, there are two routes that I have typically seen organizations taking. Now, one is quick proof of concepts to be able to showcase value for new ideas. This is one place where advisory or consulting firms typically have a huge play, because they can turn around things much quicker than having an in-house team set up for doing that. That's one. Second is the whole product route, and within the whole product life cycle, specific elements where in-house teams do not have capability or do not have the right people to actually deliver, which is where short-term requirements typically would come in. So, for example, you want somebody to do your UI, UX, some sort of UAT testing, some data engineering pipelines to be built out, whereas other elements you have available in-house. So that's when you then work closely with the AI and consulting firms to actually take those solutions to their logical conclusion. So that's the thought process that I would say typically comes into play. Another key element that also plays in here, and which is the reason why typically CXOs are hesitant to go the advisory route, is the lack of understanding of data and business context, which is where I see firms now, the third-party firms in the market, including our own, actually turning towards the whole design-led solutioning approach, because it builds in the whole data understanding and context right at the beginning to then create the solution that is tailor-made for that problem or initiative that is being driven. So that's the transition that I'm seeing over time of turning more into, if I may say so, analytics translators playing a key role in the whole development process to accelerate the journey for the CXOs in their roadmap.
Very interesting. It's almost like going to management consulting levels, where instead of doing the work, you're telling the company go about doing. That's interesting. Vijay, I want to ask the same question to you, given your breadth of experience. Are you seeing any barriers in terms of, I mean, the same question, you see that this is something that we want to keep in-house rather than engage an outfit like yours?
So I have a slightly differing perspective than what Bhaskar has said. I mean, I see a lot of innovation centers that CXOs have invested in, where they are actually comfortable having their in-house people work on understanding which are the different high-impact cases, I mean, where analytics could impact. So the so-called unicorns identification, the experimentation, they would rather that they do it in-house. Of course, there is a bit of collaboration. There is a bit of, it's like run the business, change the business. So when you're looking at changing the business, you do go to consulting firms to see, what are the best practices, who else has done it, can I look at that roadmap? But there is a lot of interest in doing the experimentation in-house. Where I see outsourcing happening, or rather where they would like third-party companies to come in, is in the operationalizing, industrializing, and rollout of that. And that is what I have seen in my experience, where there is a lot of interest that once you know what to change, which is something, and then to roll it out en masse to all parts of your company, you would rather outsource that rather than get in your own in-house people to do it. So this is a slight, differing perspective. Of course, different companies take different routes. There is a lot of interest to actually in solutions and accelerators to take over the run the business part rather than keeping it in house, which is also another area that is an area that is something that I have seen in my experience. So that's how I see. So it is going to be a very collaborative relationship in many cases, as I said, where there is absolutely no analytics talent in the company and they're trying to build this grounds up. There is always an interest to look at an external agency and then over a time build your own analytic expertise where you would rather them actually talking to their business stakeholders and experimenting, and then use again external parties for rolling out and industrializing it and operationalizing it. So that is the cycle that I have seen in my experience.
So, Vijay, do you think in this to its logical conclusion, you're going to see hyper specialists emerge in analytics where there are consulting companies which are not as horizontal in terms of analytics processes, but they're hyper specialists. I only do or catalog enrichment, right? And that is what I do, and I'm the best in that in the world. So you can never match my level of expertise. So I'm going deep instead of broad. Do you think that is going to be the logical next step, or do you still think the breadth and the depth guys will kind of coexist and there's enough market for both set of people?
See, there is an advantage to have breadth and depth, and there is also a need to have specialization. So as you rightly said, if there is a one specific area that I'm really looking to master, like, this catalog thing that you're talking about, or so whenever multiple areas getting impacted. So I'm not looking at only one domain or area specific, but I am looking at a multiple, a broad range of beliefs saying that, overall, I believe that, my whole marketing landscape needs to transform. Or I'm looking at, my supply chain landscape, especially with the pandemic situation, there is a whole lot of interest in actually plugging your chinks in the supply chain armor, right? So therefore, then you would rather look at a more breadth kind of experience. However, if you have identified that this is an area which, if I believe that, if I invest in, I'm going to have a whole lot of upside to it. So then you would go for, the answer to my case is it is very case to case specific. For example, demand sensing is a big area of interest and you would go for hyper specialists in that. However, if you're looking at an overall perspective and say, I'm going to transform my entire marketing landscape, then you would rather look at a generalist or a company to support you, because it would have impact on other domains as well. So I would say that everything is going to coexist, and there is a room for everybody in this whole analytics landscape that we are looking at.
Cool. So do you think guys, I think this has been a great session, lot of learning. There are a lot of questions coming through. So I'll take a couple of those questions.
Dipan, can I add a couple of points to
Sure.
Oscar and Vijay said, right? Agree with all the points, but see, I've been both on the sell side as well as on the buy side of analytics. And part of make or buy, build or buy decisions as well. Right? So 2 points which didn't really come out as I heard the speakers was, see, one consideration we also have in mind is getting the talent in-house is the first step. But if we do not know how to manage the talent, I'll be, shooting myself in my foot, right? So that is one of the things that we always keep in mind. Let's say if I want to hire or get a build, I want to build AI day and I want to make a team. One of the considerations that goes in the management levels when we think about this is, okay, fine, we can go hire from the market, but how are we going to manage the career, right? What would their expectations be? Do we actually have the street cred to manage them, right? We need to get it from the top, right? So from an investment standpoint or between the buy or build decisions, one of the points that goes is talent management area of thinking. The second is, what is the end purpose of a certain exercise that we are doing? For example, I'll tell you, this is something which I'm sure a lot of companies already do it. If there is an idea that I want to sell to the management, I'd go get a consultant and I won't do it internally. Right. For two reasons. One, I mean, obviously it's a consultant, there's a external validation and the mark, it says, so makes an easy sell within the company. The second is, today I'm sort of, sidelined or tunnel vision within my own company. Going to an external consultant, okay, I know that, they're looking at multiple layers, they're looking at the whole industry, probably will help me understand, benchmark myself against my peer. Am I going in the right direction or not? Right. So that's also one of the factors which go into when we are thinking about a project or making an investment or doing it, whether we should make or whether we should just buy it, which goes into the point. I thought these were the 2 points which didn't get touched. So that's right.
Thanks, Kishore. So, the takeaways for anybody who's trying to sell you stuff is really hire top class talent and understand it as best as you can, because those are the two.
Yep.
So one of the questions that has come up is how has COVID impacted adoption of analytics? So the specific question is, because of COVID, people are getting more digital. So do you think that this is the big push that is required, as if we all wanted it, to get AI adopted more broadly within CPG companies? I guess I'll pose that question to Dan, and then all of the rest of you can kind of take it up. What do you think, Dan? Do you think that COVID is going to push AI adoption within CPG companies?
That's a difficult question to answer. I see it's changing the way we are working, right? We're looking at screens a lot more. There's meetings are longer. I don't necessarily think that it's going to lead to adoption of AI and analytics more, because I see this changing the way we interact with each other, not necessarily the way we are taking decisions. I think those organizational cultures, those mindsets are not going to change because of COVID. Our way of using these things will change, but I don't think it's really going to impact the adoption of AI and analytics that much.
Okay.
I mean, with the pandemic, Dipayan, if I can add, with the pandemic, I think for CPG companies specifically, if you see, and also for retail, what has really changed is the consumer actually now going online, right? I mean, the consumer habits have shifted online, and that actually has forced the CPG companies to relook at their business strategy itself. And, somewhere I was reading, and to Kishore, maybe this would be interesting for you, that, for every $1 billion being spent online, there is a need for 900,000 square feet of warehouse space, which has been created. And today, large countries are actually big countries like UK, US are grappling with this, because the whole rise in warehouse costs, because today the consumer is looking at, even the Christmas shopping, if you think about it, world over, I think there has been a huge, humongous rise in the online side of it rather than in the offline. So then that has actually thrown opportunity for digital transformation, and therefore the allied analytics to that. So that is what at least I have seen. So as Dan was saying, it is not really the decision making per se, but it is the fact that there is a need, the business need for actually digital transformation, digitizing yourself, which is what is actually impacted, therefore, some of the allied analytics and AI related to that.
I mean, Dipa and I have a completely 180 take on this, right? I think it's definitely going to change, and it is changing already. Like, you can't imagine it, the way it is changing to me. I'll quote some examples, right? For what took 7 or 8 years for Netflix, Discovery did it in a matter of 8 weeks, right? The amount of changes that are happening that we are seeing, Telsin, for example, you talk about it, right? Across all the spaces, and this definitely has a rippling effect, right? Today, the way we are consuming media, it will also change how people are consuming their products. So unless and until as an organization, I keep journey in mind, that complete decision-making cycle, the on thing that we talk about, I have to change. I mean, there's one joke which was going around in WhatsApp saying, who's the true, digital transformation company? Is it like the
Always
CEO?
been
The CEO?
COVID-19.
Yeah. So everyone was saying, yeah, COVID-19 has made us digital, right? For example, I'll tell you one. When we do our captions and decisions, so we run our calendar.
Is it just me or did we lose Kishore?
Oh, I thought it was just me.
I think
But
I
I can't hear him either.
Sure.
Kishore is having some issue. We are not able to. So probably, Dipayan, we can continue till the time Kishore joins
Sure,
in.
absolutely. So, Oscar, if you don't mind, would love to hear your point of view on this.
Yes, absolutely. I would actually agree with what Kishore was saying. This whole pandemic actually has thrown up new opportunities where AI can actually be leveraged to make a difference. Telemedicine, online shopping, deliveries, and associated things like Kishore earlier was referencing, right? Can we use, for example, the food delivery guys for collection of bottles and other similar things, right? So these are opportunities that exist only because of the pandemic, and otherwise we would not have probably gone in that direction. Or even if we did, it would have taken a few years to kind of go there. That's one. Second, for established businesses, what this pandemic actually has done is question the basis of the BAU analytics that happens in the inside their organizations, because this is something nobody has seen before. All the models that were built before have completely failed, right? So there is a lot of rebuild that has happened. One. Second, as that rebuild happens, do those assumptions that we started with still hold true or not? That's a key question that they are asking, and then accordingly recrafting their solutions to then drive the benefits from transformation.
Cool. So some people are benefiting, I guess, after all this madness. The next question, very interesting one, is how do we see AI ML working in the world of product recommendations and content personalization? And very specifically, I think Dance is addressed to you, is how is design thinking playing a role in this?
Okay, so I'll take the example of how this is sort of helping us bring in very specific conversations or specific recommendations when we are talking to end customers. And if you're familiar, WNS is essentially a BPO. We have a large footprint in the call center sort of domain, right? So a lot of times when we are talking to customers, because of all the data and insights that is available through, let's say, social media or through their call history or their product usage history, while we are having conversations with those customers, the AI is able to deliver me insights, not just in terms of the recommendations that I should make. It tells me what tone I should use when I'm talking to the customer, what are the keywords that I should use when I'm talking to the customer, and this is the level of personalization that we're talking. So tomorrow, if I'm talking about, let's say, a physical product in the CPG domain, I would be able to pinpoint almost what kind of flavor, what kind of smell, what kind of color of packaging is going to attract which kind of customer, or even be able to deliver them those kind of personalizations when they're trying to buy all of these products online or even within shelf. And so one of my past experiences was with a company called DYWorks, and DYWorks was one of the largest players in packaging design in India at that point in time. And so while I was not really into analytics at that point in time, but from our clients, we used to have a lot of discussions around how we can personalize or hyper personalize product packaging for specific customers. And that's where there are interventions like those where data and AI can play a huge role.
Cool. The rest of the panel, any of you want to take a shot at the question? How can AI and analytics work in content personalization, product recommendations?
I mean, it's already there, right? Sorry, last time. Can you hear me, guys?
We can.
Much better.
Yeah, I think I've already aced the game. There's Uber coming up. I think any of the front-end service apps. I know Urban Services is also doing a lot of great work there in terms of recommending what's the best service for you at what time that you could do. So that's definitely good. It's only a matter of more and more time. I think amongst our audience, a lot of them are MBA students as well. So what would this mean for them is probably there's going to be a huge demand in good UI UX skill sets that will be needed for these products, right? I don't know, in the last point that I was trying to make, that AI is going to change the way it is making. I was talking about our budget decision making, essentially, which used to take us around 3 months. This year, we kind of closed it in like 4 weeks. Right, that's a huge change, and it is going to have an impact on how we do the business as well. That's on the other point. But yeah, the UI UX skill set is one where it's going to change the product recommendation. There will be more high-end algorithms that people will be used. People can develop. So that would mean that better math and better understanding of your programming capabilities. I would suggest get your basics right in terms of start with C, learn C. I know it's not a very favorite programming language today, but it really sooner or later it is going to be it'll again come in another 4 or 5 years for sure, because the time progresses, the IoT devices are exploding, and all their coding and everything is done in C. Right, so it is a good skill set to keep in your bag at this very, very early point in time. Yeah, those 2 points.
Thanks, Kishore. Vijay, do you want to talk a little bit? I think there is a question, as Kishore already addressed a little bit, about how students can prep for a career in AI and analytics, specifically in CPG and retail. And there are a lot of MBA analytics students here. So what would your advice to them be?
Yeah, so my advice is, I mean, of course, today you already heard the panelists speak, like we had Dan and all, express the need for design thinking. So I think the whole MBA and, analytics space really, when we're looking at that, so coding, of course, is a de rigueur. Understanding of, tools and techniques is also something which is expected. But what would really change is the understanding of the business problem and the client perspective, and which is what Dan, Bhaskar and all were talking at length about, as to how they have changed the perspective of application of analytics using design thinking. I think that is an area which is something that I would strongly recommend to actually build as well. A deeper understanding of the problem statement and how the user is going to use that. I think these two will become key, apart from the understanding of tools and techniques and the technology that underlies the application of it.
Thanks, Vijay. Bhaskar would like to hear from you as well, your advice to the students here.
I'll just add one point to what Vijay was saying. A key thing for any career, and more specifically AI and analytics, is having the right problem-solving mindset. If you can actually start breaking the problem down into its specific components, know which ones you can impact and go after them to then have the impact that is desired. I think that's crucial. So problem solving 101 should be the base that anybody needs to be able to start a career, and more specifically in AI and analytics, that's crucial.
Thanks, Bhaskar. Dan, what about you? Any specific point that you would like to make to the students?
So I know that everybody's, including me, we have spoken about design thinking at length. Also, if one of the things that you should know is systems design, because systems design is also very important when you're putting together, complex systems and complex processes, especially when in CPG, it's very important because you're designing processes for supply chain, for operations, complex processes. So a good understanding of systems thinking is also very critical. And, like design thinking is becoming a discipline in itself.
Cool. And if I may add a couple of points from my side, right? One, AI and analytics is a buzzword, and it typically, when you go to it, encompasses a very wide field of specialized skill sets, right? going from data platforms and data engineering to data science with sort of analysis in the middle, right? So I don't think pretty much to begin with, one can span the entire spectrum. They require very, very different mindsets, very, very different orientations. So the students, you must understand what are the skill sets required for a data engineer, for a good data platform product manager, for a data scientist, and so on and so forth, and build up those skill sets, right? That's number one. The second thing is very specific to analysts and data scientists is what I have found lacking a little is the storytelling skills, where it's when you come out and you present your output in a mass of numbers, it's very, very difficult. Because see, the mistake that I've seen analysts make is because they numbers day in, day out, they think that if you put a table full or a chart of numbers, the insights are very obvious to whoever. But the person who's looking at it for the first time probably just lost in a sea of data. Built up to that extent, to a much great extent, along with skills. So cool. As we are winding down, I just want kind of one final question to all of you guys. How do you think about internally within a captive environment? How should the analytics center be structured? So, for example, some companies have gone centralized, some companies have got federated, some companies have left it independent, some companies have left it as part of the technology org, people have made it part of the finance org, etc., etc. So, love to think about, hear from you guys as to how you think ideally somebody looking to set up an analytics unit and set it up for success would like to set it up. So, in no particular order, anybody that wants to pick it up and
yeah, sure. I can take a swing at it. So there's no one size fits all, right? At least see here at ABinBev, I was with the company when it did the initial journey a little bit, right? When I joined, it was about 60, 70 odd people. Today we have more than 200 people in the team, right? So we started off with a very centralized kind of a structure, moved on to decentralized. So I think the more important point of it is thinking on the factors of how your organization is set up, the overall organization and the decision-making process that happens. And then, start building that team and the structure to fit that. Right. Sometimes in some situations, I know that today we are very decentralized. We have teams globally across all the zones, which are very spread out. There are functional specific people who are identified as well. But had been the starting point, it would have been very difficult for us to build or scale any solutions that are there. It had to start at a central place. We're going after a specific use case where we can prove the value to the business. This was on the commercial capability side where we proved the value for this. And then as it started growing and more, now today we are in a much more decentralized way where the teams are focused. The geographical and the functional specific teams are more focused on for that market or for that functional problem they are focused at. Whereas the Global Center of Excellence, we take up much more broad ranging, I would say enabling platforms. To quote an example, like we have some algorithms which can predict a person's performance. So the algorithm can tell me next year what my performance rating will be. So will I get a very good or what it is? So we've tested those algorithms which are very good at the same time scary as well, to be honest. But as part of Global Center of Excellence, we pick up such projects which are applicable everywhere. We pick up building the digital and the data platforms, which are enabling all the functions, all the zones focused on. So for any CPG company or any player, if they are thinking at it, they need to first try and understand it is going to be a learning experience, no matter at what point they start. That needs to be their opening mind. And they are going to fail for sure. the mistakes will happen no matter what you do. The idea should be like, okay, let's start off with this. Even if we were to start off with most impactful use case, if we should go it, make it a buy or a build decision, right? Should we just get the consultant in house and then work with the team to do it? I think it's a journey that it needs to, that organizations or the CPG firms need to go through. But that being said, a resolve at a senior management level in terms of whether sooner or later this is going to be a very way of changing the way we are working. Having that kind of an alignment, I remember Bhaskar saying like they had a 1-year project, but they had sprints every 2 months or 3 weeks. So quick touch points, starting off with the structure that your budget can allow at that point in time. And then, getting your early wins and making sure the right guys who are holding the purse strings are in line with the vision, and the money comes in and you build it. So that's what I think should typically a player could potentially do.
Vijaya, what do you think in terms of, right? If you were to kind of put on your advisory hat and somebody setting it up, what would you do?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of merit to start, right? I mean, as a global center of excellence, where you bring in the global best practices, the decision-making capability, the innovation charter, so to speak. So I think to start with, to me, that is the way to go. I mean, if it is too federated and every business function making their own sort of decision, application of analytics, it becomes very disparate. I mean, according to me, there is a lot of merit in bringing a uniform or a unified way of thinking or bringing in the best practices. But as analytics gets operationalized, there is a lot of merit for the businesses to actually run it on their own. There is a global charter of excellence. There is a global charter of innovation that this team is driving. A central team is driving. But in terms of the operationalizing and the day-to-day decision making using analytics, I think it should be something that the individual business functions or the individual the regions or the way the organization is set up should own. So that is how I would. So it's kind of an hub model to so to speak, but that is how I see. And today, if you see the CAO, the CDO kind of roles today are reporting to the CIO or the CFOs in many organizations. Soon, I think this is going to move towards this becoming an independent CXO on its own, with the seat in the boardroom and at the table as a rubbing shoulders with the CFO. I think this is where data analytics today is headed towards, and it is becoming an increasingly important area of competitive advantage at the companies which invest.
Thanks, Vijay. Bhaskar, what do you think, especially about the latter part? Where is analytics rolling it? Do you think it makes sense to keep it as a separate standalone org, or for better propagate analytics, should it roll into the CTO's org or the CIO's org or the CFO's org?
Yeah, so as of today, as Vijay was saying, right, it rolls up typically under the CIO or the CFO. Increasingly, organizations are seeing data-driven AI and analytics as key parts of transformation. And chief transformation officer positions are cropping up across a number of organizations, which is where I think strategically it fits in very, very well. And we should probably keep it that way, because it has the right amount of horizontal expertise that is required to actually go across the multiple verticals and work closely with the different stakeholders, rather than spinning off as an independent unit as things stand today. As maturity improves, data literacy overall improves across organizations, yes, it would probably make sense to have a CAO or CDO as the standalone business unit, which then has the accountability and responsibility for rolling out these initiatives.
Dan, what are your viewpoints on that?
I think pretty much covered by Vijay and Bhaskar. I think Vijay's answer was exactly what I would have said. Hub and spoke model works best. I've seen, what a federalized structure does to analytics capability. I think hub and spoke works best. Also in terms of where this should be nested. Again, I will stick with what Bhaskar said, right? Because that's what I've seen lately is that it's increasingly becoming a part of the transformation organization, because analytics is not just about having a practice on its own. It's about transforming the way we work, the way we make our decisions. So that's where it sits the best.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I think this was a very, very enriching discussion. We got a lot of insights across the span of expertise that you guys bring to the table. So I would like to thank a lot for you lot for all your time and all your insights and being so candid and generous in sharing all these insights. Look forward to another such session. Kapil, over to you.
Yeah, I think fantastic. I was just glued to this session, and I was hearing some interesting thoughts which came in from a CPG perspective. And I think the topic was rightly mentioned, the new frontiers in innovation context, and there were a lot of new frontiers in terms of innovation and things which are happening, which were mentioned by each of the leaders, whether it's around, and one interesting thing which I heard at the last, which made Kishore, was prediction of the person's performance. So that was something which was very interesting, which I thought would have been also interesting to others. But absolutely, whether it's around Vijaya talking about the overall global center of excellence, the federated versus the central model, the innovation charters, the application of analytics, and whether it's around Bhaskara, talking specifically, getting into detail on each and every topic, whether it's around the operating model, whether it's the changing role of CIOs, CXOs, and the Chief Transformation Office. The way things are changing from a data analytics perspective. Dan, of course, has been great in terms of the design thinking concepts, which he mentions. I have been part of his sessions earlier, and how that was linked to the overall CPG space. And Dipan, thank you so much for actually consolidating all that, keeping the session very engaging, as well as encouraging for the students who are here. I think it was a fantastic thing done. Before we just move to our next set of work which we do, I just wanted to mention that as we continue with the next set of next roundtable series, we have the AI in banking insurance, which will be coming up on January 29th. And I'm looking forward for all your participation in this and making this again successful. We will have another set of leaders specifically who are experts in the AI and banking insurance sector. So thank you so much for all the participants. Thank you so much to the leaders for making time and getting this very engaging session. And thank you all. And have a happy Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.